Section 7 of American Big Game Hunting, a collection of stories by the Boone and Crockett Club. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. American Big Game Hunting, Section 7, Big Game in the Rockies, Part 1, by Archibald Rogers. Some 8 or 10 years ago, it was by no means difficult for one who knew where to go and how to hunt to get excellent shooting in northwestern Wyoming. Large game was then moderately abundant, with the exception of buffalo. The latter had just been exterminated, but bleaching in the sun, the ghastly evidences of man's sordid and selfish policy lay exposed at every step. Indian troubles of a very formidable character did a great deal toward keeping the game intact in this portion of the country, by keeping the white man out, and while other parts of Wyoming grew, and towns sprang up with rapid growth to become, in an incredibly short time, cities involving in the destruction, as the past sad history shows, of the wild animals in their vicinity, this northwestern portion remained unsettled and acted as an asylum to receive within its Rocky Mountain ranges and vast sheltering forests the scattering bands of elk and deer fleeing from annihilation and the encroaching haunts of men. As soon as it was safe then, and in some instances unquestionably before, cattlemen, not inaptly styled pioneers of civilization, began to drift down along the valley of the Bighorn, and, like the patriarchs of old, brought their flocks with them, settling here and there, wherever they could find advantageous sites for their ranches. And now, as I propose to give some hunting experiences of those days, if you will accompany me to Billings on the Northern Pacific Railway, the nearest town to my ranch and the Mecca to which the devout cattleman drives his wagon for supplies, I will introduce you to the foothills and mountains and some of the adventures therein. After 4 days on a sleeping car, it is a delightful release to tumble out on a frosty September morning and being guided to where the ranch wagon and crew are bivouacked just outside the limits of the rapidly growing town to get one's breakfast on terra firma. No time is now to be wasted. The mules are hitched up, the little band of horses are rounded together, and when we have jumped into our saddles, the cook, who always handles the reins, gives a crack of his whip, and we take our departure from civilization. A couple of miles brings us to a primitive wire rope ferry where we cross the Yellowstone River, which at this season of the year is low and clear. In a few minutes we are over and ascending the bluffs to the other side, take our last look at the beautiful valley we are leaving behind. By night we reach Pryor's Creek, and picking out as good a camping place as possible, the mules are soon unhitched and with the horses turned loose to graze. While the cook is preparing the evening meal, I bag a few prairie chickens to give variety to the fare. Breakfasting at daylight the next morning, we are soon underway again, with Pryor's Mountains in the distance as our goal for this day's journey. Toward evening, the white teepees of an Indian camp are visible, clustered in a picturesque group close to Pryor's Mountains. Passing them, not without paying a slight tribute in the way of tobacco and such other gifts as our copper-colored friends generally demand, we fairly enter Pryor's Gap, and there, in a beautiful amphitheater, we again make camp. This evening we must have trout for supper, so all hands go to work, and we are soon rewarded with a fine mess of trout from the headwaters of Pryor's Creek. The next day, as we reach the summit of the Gap, one of the most beautiful views in the country opens out. The great main range of the Rocky Mountains stretches before us, its rugged, snow-capped peaks glistening in the morning sun, and we long to be there. But many a long mile still intervenes, and 44 miles of desert has to be crossed today. This is always an arduous undertaking. It is monotonous to the extreme, and men and animals are sure to suffer for want of good water, for after leaving Sage Creek on the other side of the Gap, there is no water to be had until Stinking Water River is reached. But all things must have an end, and at last, late in the evening, we find ourselves encamped on the banks of that stream, beautiful despite its unfortunate name. Footnote: Bancroft, in his account of the early explorations of Wyoming, refers to this river as follows: It is a slander to use this nondescriptive name for an inoffensive stream. The early trappers took it from the Indians, who, in their peculiar fashion, called it the river that ran by the stinking water, referring to badly smelling hot springs on its banks. Fording the river the next morning, not a very terrifying operation in its present low stage, we climb a steep bank and soon begin our long ascent of the divide that separates us from our ranch and Gray Bull River. Accompanied by an immense amount of expletives and very bad language, the mules are finally induced to gain the summit. Here, even the most casual observer could not fail to be impressed with the magnificent and apparently indefinite expanse of mountain scenery that, turn which way he will, meets his view. However, we have no time to linger, and picking our way among the countless buffalo wallows which indent the level surface of the summit, the wagon, with its wheels double locked, is soon groaning and creaking down the descent, which leads to the merrily rushing Mitsitsi, following which, down to its junction with Gray Bull, we are soon inside our own fence and joyously welcomed by the dogs. Here, too, I find my trusty friend and companion of all my hunting trips, Tazwell Woody, a grizzled veteran of the mountains, who once long ago claimed Missouri as his home. From the ranch to the mountains is a comparatively short trip, for one day's travel to the westward would place you well up in their slopes. Let me say of this portion of the range that it is the most rugged, broken, and precipitous of its whole extent, and the charm of overcoming its apparent inaccessibility can only be appreciated by one who has toiled and sweated in surmounting the difficulties of mountain travel from a pure love of nature in its wildest and grandest form. Experience having taught me long ago that it was well nigh impossible to get good specimens of all the different varieties of big game on any one trip, I made up my mind to devote a certain amount of time each year to one variety. By this means their habits could be studied more closely and the main point never lost sight of. In a short paper like this, I may best take up the chief of these varieties one by one, and without regard to the time of their occurrence, tell something of my experiences with each. And first, as to perhaps the shyest, the Rocky Mountain sheep. In the pursuit of Rocky Mountain sheep, the hunter, to be successful, must have a fondness for the mountains, a sure foot, good wind, and a head which no height will turn. These requisites, with patience and perseverance, will sooner or later, as the hunter gains experience, reward him with ample returns. Sometimes, however, the unexpected will happen, and the following tale may serve as an example. We were camping well up in the mountains, and almost any hour of the day sheep could be seen with the glasses. I was after sheep. It was my intent, business, and purpose to get some if possible, and all my energies were concentrated in that direction. There were two fine rams in particular that we could see, about 1.5 miles from camp, occupying the slope of a rocky point or promontory that jutted out from the spur of the range. These two had a commanding position, for while it seemed impossible to get to them from above, they could see every movement from below or on each side of them. However, after studying the country for 2 days, I found that by ascending the mountain behind them and coming down again, I could still keep above them. Though there was a very narrow ledge of rocks, rather a hazardous place, this had to be crossed to get to the point they were on. This narrow ledge they had to come back on to get to the main part of the mountain, so stationing my companion there and taking off my shoes and putting on an extra pair of heavy stockings, I proceeded to crawl toward the sheep. With due care and not making a sound, I made a most successful stalk. Peering over the ledge, I raised my head just enough to be sure my game was still there. They were there, sure enough, within 75 yards of me, totally unconscious of danger, when all of a sudden they sprang to their feet and dashed away from below me as though possessed of a devil. I fired hastily, but of course missed, and turning, tried to run back to head them off, wondering what had startled them, as I knew I had made no noise. But running over broken rock in one's stocking feet is a very different thing from the slow, deliberate movements that brought me there, and besides, in a few seconds I had the mortification of seeing my would-be victims bounding across the narrow ledge that separated them from the mountain. However, I thought with satisfaction that at least one would meet its death from my companion in hiding. But, alas, although the rams almost knocked him down, his cartridge missed fire, and the game ran safely by. Regaining my shoes, which was a great relief, I soon joined my companion, and then discover the curious adventure I had been made the subject of. It seems that when I had reached a point well down on the promontory, I must have disturbed a cougar, which was evidently there for the same purpose I was, and which had stealthily followed me as I proceeded toward the sheep. Old Woody described it as highly amusing, I sneaking down after the rams, and the panther sneaking down upon me. As soon as the beast got an opportunity, it turned off, and making the descent, alarmed the rams, and thus made my hunt a failure. For several days I watched this point, but those rams never came back to it again. However, not long after this, I was amply rewarded and secured a fine specimen. From one of the high ledges I was looking down into sort of an amphitheater shut in by massive rocky heights. In this secluded retreat, a little band of ewes with one grand old patriarch as their master could be seen every day disporting themselves with many a curious gambol. After many unsuccessful attempts, I was enabled to get a shot, and great was my delight at depriving the little band of their supercilious protector. Upon another occasion, I was camping away back up in the mountains, where there were about 18 inches of snow on the ground. The weather had been villainous, there was no meat in the camp, and I determined to see if I could not get a deer. The prospect was not very cheering, for shortly after starting, a heavy fog shut down, hiding all objects from view. I had not proceeded far, however, when I struck the fresh track of a ram, and following it cautiously for about a mile through the open, it led into a dense patch of pine on the side of the mountain. Proceeding very carefully now, I soon made out the outline of a fine old ram that had wandered off here in the timber to be by himself. Giving him no time to run, for I was close upon him, certainly not farther than 25 yards, I planted a shot just back of the shoulder, but he did not seem to mind it. I gave him another when he started to walk slowly off. One more shot in the same place, and down he came. Even then he died hard. Such is the vitality of an old ram, for upon examining him, I found his heart all torn to pieces. This was a good head of nearly 16 inches circumference of horns, and the girth of the chest was 46 inches. In returning to camp for horses to pack him on, I jumped 5 more sheep, but having done well enough, they were allowed to disappear in safety. Sheep have a wonderfully keen vision, and it is absolutely useless to try to get them if they once see you, unless you happen to be above them and on their favorite runway. Then they huddle together and try to break back past you. The only safe rule is to travel high and keep working up above their feeding grounds. In the spring of the year they are much easier to kill than in the fall, for then the heavy winter snows have driven them out of the mountains, and they come low down after the fresh green grass. The rams are then in bands, having laid aside the hostility that later in the year seems to possess each and every one of them. I was much interested once in watching a band of 8 rams, all of them old fellows. They would feed early in the morning, and then betake themselves to a large rock which stood on a grassy slope, where they would play for hours. One of them would jump on a rock and then challenge the others to butt him off. 2 or 3 would then jump on, and their horns would come together with a clash that I could hear from my position, which was fully a quarter of a mile away. On one occasion I saw them suddenly stop their play, and each ram became fixed. There the little band stood as though carved out of stone. They remained that way for quite half an hour without a movement. I could not detect with the glasses the slightest motion, when presently 3 strange rams made their appearance. Here was the explanation that I was looking for. They had seen them long before I had. The 3 visitors were not very well received, but were compelled to beat an ignominious and hasty retreat up the mountainside. As summer draws near and the winter snow begins to disappear, bands of elk may be seen migrating toward their favorite ranges. The bulls are now together in bands of greater or lesser extent. Their horns are well grown out, but are soft and in the velvet. The cows and calves stick closely to the thick timber. As the season advances and the flies become troublesome, the bulls will get up as high as they can climb and seem to delight in standing on the brink of some mountain precipice. I have often wondered, in seeing them standing thus, whether they were insensible of the magnificent scenery that surrounded them. Reader, what would you have given to have seen as I have, a band of 250 bull elk collected together on a beautiful piece of green grassy turf at an elevation of 9,000 feet? Here was a sight to make man's nerves tingle. This was the largest band of bulls by actual count that I have ever seen, though my cousin and partner once saw in the fall of the year, including bulls, cows, and calves, 1,500. This was on the memorable occasion when the only elk ever killed by any of my men gave up his life, and we have all concluded that this particular elk was frightened to death, for though 3 men shot at him and each were confident he hit him, they always asserted afterward that no bullet mark could be found on him. Generally in August, in each band of bulls, there will be found 1 or 2 barren cows. About the end of August, after the bulls have rubbed the velvet off their antlers, they will come back to the vicinity of the bands of cows. I have seen bulls as late as September 4 peaceably feeding or resting among the bands of cows. Usually in a band of 50 cows, there will be 3 or 4 males, including possibly 1 or 2 spike bulls. I have seen these spike bulls in the velvet as late as September 4, though by that time the older bulls had mostly rubbed the velvet off. A little later, about September 7, the bulls begin to challenge each other in the hunting parlance to whistle. This, on a clear frosty night, is sometimes extremely melodious, and it is one of the most impossible sounds to imitate. Hunting elk, if I may be pardoned for saying it, I do not consider very exciting sport to a man thoroughly versed in the woods. They are far too noble an animal to kill unnecessarily, and if one hunts them in September, when they are whistling, it is a very easy matter, guided by the sound, to stalk them successfully. Footnote: a spike bull is a young elk carrying his first or dag antlers. These are single-tined, though in rare instances they are bifurcated. Elk, like the rest of the deer family, are excessively fond of saline matter. Their trails may be seen leading from every direction to the great alkaline licks that abound in certain parts of their mountain ranges. Among other favorite resorts are springs, which make, on steep wooded slopes, delightfully boggy wallowing places. The bulls revel in these from August to the middle of September. It is not an uncommon thing to kill them just as they emerge from their viscous bath coated with mud. The elk has a great deal of natural curiosity, and I have seen extraordinary instances of this where they had been but little hunted or alarmed. My friend Phillips of Washington, who was with me, will vouch for the veracity of this story, which I give as an example. We were wandering along the tops of the mountain, some 9,000 feet up, trying to stalk some elk, not to shoot them, but to photograph them. We jumped a small band of bulls, numbering about 16. They trotted off slowly, frequently stopping to look back, until all but 2 large bulls had disappeared. These walked slowly back to within 50 yards of where we were standing and stopped, facing us. It was truly one of the most charming sights one could have wished for, to have those graceful, sleek creatures almost close enough to caress. Presently, with a defiant snort and with a succession of short barks, they would move away and come back again, repeating these maneuvers over and over again until we got tired of trying to look like a brace of marble posts and sat down. We thought this would frighten them, but it did not, and once I thought they were going to proceed from curiosity to more offensive operations, so close did they come to us. Even my caterwauling, as my friend unfeelingly characterized my attempt to imitate their challenges, did not seem to alarm them, and not until a full half-hour had elapsed did this pair of inquisitive worthies at length jog off. Elk are vigorous fighters, and while it seems that their combats seldom terminate fatally, the broken points of their antlers and their scarred and bruised bodies bear testimony to the severity of their encounters. A full-grown elk stands about 16 hands high, is about 8 feet 2 inches long from nose to tip of tail, and with a girth around the chest of about 6 feet. It was on the head of Wind River that I secured my largest head. The regularity of the points was somewhat marred, as the bull had evidently been fighting only a short time before I had killed him. These horns were not very massive, but the length measured along the outside curve is 63 7/8 inches. Their circumference between bay and tray is from 7 1/2 to 8 inches, and the greatest spread between antlers is 49 inches. End of section 7.